Good morning, and welcome to Morning Movie News, where Hugh Jackman might be done with Wolverine, but obviously Marvel is not. And they're using the character, the very popular character, to break into yet another medium, podcasting, with the announcement they're going to debut Wolverine The Long Night in spring 2018. It's a fabulous idea. I think the execution leaves a little bit to be desired, which we'll discuss. But first, I would like to point out that if that Disney-Fox deal does go through, perhaps Hugh Jackman is not so retired, because he has said that he would like to return as the character if it meant that he could be a part of the Avengers. And seeing how well it turned out with Spider-Man joining the team, I think that's something that nobody would be able to resist doing. They'd have to hurry it up, though, although Hugh Jackman does seem to continue to be in very good shape and could always, continue to do the old man Logan persona as well, that he did so well in Logan. All right, so anyway, what's going on with Wolverine The Long Night podcast? Well, it's going to debut in spring 2018, but only on Stitcher Premium. Now, I don't know what the heck Stitcher is, and I guess that's the whole point here, right? Now I do, because of Wolverine The Long Night, getting one of those popular characters. And I guess as they start to use popular characters like this in podcasting, we'll all start to learn the landscape there a little bit better. But pay for it, or just know where we're not paying to listen to something. Because you can wait until the fall of 2018 to listen to it on other platforms. I suspect there will be a copious amount of piracy with Wolverine The Long Night, because that's an awful long time between releases. Spring 2018 to fall 2018. So it's a 10-episode podcast, again scripted, and it's being written by a writer actually for the competition, DC Comics writer Ben Percy. And they said this was like a selling point in the trades. They were like, Ben Percy's writing it. And I was like, who? So I looked it up, and he apparently writes Green Arrow and Teen Titans for DC. Now, I don't read Green Arrow, but I do read Teen Titans because Damian Wayne is in it, and I do like Starfire, etc. But I gotta tell you, it's a slog every month because I think Ben Percy is not doing a particularly good job. So he's actually a negative selling point in terms of this podcast, and certainly a reason not to pay for Stitcher Premium to listen to it. So what's Ben Percy writing about? What's the story he's picked? Two government agents, that's right, Wolverine isn't even the main character, are investigating murders in the fictional town of Burns, Alaska. I don't know why it can't be a real town, whatever. And Wolverine is the prime suspect. And this very cleverly ties into the true crime trend, which has really taken over podcasting and put it on the mainstream map. Great idea. Again, I would like Wolverine to be the main character, to be honest with you, even though I understand he's not particularly chatty. But again, am I going to subscribe to Stitcher Premium to listen to two government agents talk? I mean, let's see who voices them. But right now, I'm not particularly enthused. So who's voicing Wolverine? Well, it's Richard Armitage, who looks an awful lot like Hugh Jackman, interestingly enough, from the Hobbit movies and a ton of UK television. But I think it's weird they didn't get the actor who voiced Wolverine in the Fox animated series. That, to me, would be a stronger sell. That's Cal Dodd, who's still working. In fact, he and a number of other well-known voice actors, Kevin Conroy, Rob Paulson, have just teamed with Andrea Romano of DC Animation fame to do a new animated series that's theirs about actors in Hollywood who, of course, are the animal actors in Hollywood that you see in movies and television, and what working in the business is like from their perspective. That's a very good idea, but it's no Wolverine The Long Night podcast, and I'm sure Cal Dodd would have loved to have been a part of it. Maybe he wanted more money. Maybe for some reason they feel Richard Armitage is a bigger appeal. I think that's ridiculous, but we'll see how it turns out. But I do think this is a very good idea. I think that Wolverine's a great fit for the true crime podcast trend. And I can't wait to hear Snicked in a podcast. And I would be curious to see how they handle all the action, because he's a brawler. There's murders going on, right? And of course, I'm sure we'll be hearing lots of beer cans being opened as well. So are you going to listen to this? Are you going to pay for Stitcher Premium? Will you wait until the fall, or will you take to the high seas of piracy? And what do you think of Ben Percy? Maybe you like his comics. Maybe you think he is a selling point. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts about this down below. Now, for the second story of the day, speaking of that Disney-Fox deal, a number of you, when I tweeted about that, yesterday, we should actually have an answer on that deal next week even. Some of you were like, Disney is evil, and, it's going to kill creativity in the business. So horrible. Well, here's something that Disney's doing that I think is a counterpoint to that. Now, today in the Hollywood Reporter, they got themselves a nice little headline saying, Disney's 100 Million Club of Women Directors. And I was like, whoa, these women's films aren't even out yet. Getting ahead of yourself there, Disney? And they're like, no, when we say 100 million, we mean the budget we've given them to work with. Because never in the history of Hollywood has more than one female director at a time, and I think rarely at all, been given a $100 million budget to work with. Now, of course, Patty Jenkins is inspiring all of this, but Patty Jenkins is so iconic, and so many of you are like, well, also you're upset about Patty Jenkins, and why do people keep talking about Patty Jenkins? Well, Patty Jenkins is an anomaly, and the question is, can she become the norm, right? And so Disney is certainly hoping that as they try to follow in her footsteps with their pack of female directors, and they've got Ava DuVernay with A Wrinkle in Time, Niki Caro for Mulan. I'm so happy they're spending $100 million on Mulan. Woohoo! And then Anna Boden, who's a co-director, but still, hey, technically a director of the Captain Marvel movie. But the thing is that the most important thing for these female directors is tone, 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 tone. I mean, I was very disappointed with Liu Yifei just being cast as Mulan, that there was a huge out of the gate, there was a huge amount of attention paid to how attractive she is. In fact, somebody in the comments on the video that I made wrote, if I had to pick between Mulan being attractive or tough, like a tough fighter, if I had to pick between the two, I'd go with attractive. And it's like, that's exactly what Mulan stands against. So I hope that things don't turn out that way in the movie. And I also think that A Wrinkle in Time is probably not going to do that well at the box office. I don't know if I would have given Ava DuVernay $100 million for this property, especially considering, when I saw her storyboards for how she visually planned to approach it. I was like, so you're making a $100 million TV movie, eh, Ava? Maybe I shouldn't have given you $100 million. We'll see how it turns out. Although these days, Netflix is going around giving about that much money, but that's because they want it to look like film. All right, so one of the things that I think has held women back in the director's chair for quite some time is an inability or lack of desire to compete in the mainstream marketplace. For instance, you'll recall that short that came out maybe a year ago at this point, where women directors were hilariously having to sit through meetings with bro executives, right? And it's like, if you can't play along with the executives in the pitch room and you think you're too cool for school and that you're above all that, well, then I can see why your movies aren't doing better, right? I mean, Patty Jenkins did so well with Wonder Woman because she loves Indiana Jones and Spider-Man and the original Superman with Christopher Reeve by Richard Donner. And she made a movie that fit with those other films and has been received as well as those other films. So I think that it's really important, particularly in this trend, to have a transition period for female directors not to be like, why doesn't everybody like what I like? I call it the rainbows and unicorns problem, right? Women directors have to really work hard to make sure they make something that has universal appeal to multiple demographics, not just I've made a $100 million women's picture. That's a bad idea. And that's, again, why Patty Jenkins' Wonder Woman, with its broad appeal, is such a win. But it would be great if this $100 million club became something not just for the budget, but also for how these films opened at the box office. I think it's almost impossible that A Wrinkle in Time will open at $100 million. So I guess that's already not going to happen. Mulan could, and maybe Captain Marvel could. I will have to see how that film looks and if it is indeed setting up Secret Invasion. All right, so I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that. And hey, Disney is promoting these female directors. And it's a diverse group to boot, so maybe you can feel like they're not so evil after all. Okay, so the third story of the day is about Wanda's Legendary Entertainment, which finally got a CEO. They had been on the search for one after they hilariously fired Thomas Tull, who brought China in. He brought Wanda Group in. He was like, hey, come invest in my company. You want to own it, Wanda Group? And they're like, we'd love to own it. And then a year later, they were like, but you suck at running it, so you're fired. That was crazy. So you always be aware when you're making deals of what the outcome could be for you personally. Now, there was some discussion that Wanda would install someone from China to run the company, but that did not happen, perhaps because there's a lot of problems right now in China about financing going to Hollywood. The Chinese government is cracking down on that. Not so much just yet, but it's like a tentative situation, which is one of the reasons it was hard to fill this position, because some people feel that Legendary someday in the near future could have no financing from China. But they got someone. He settled on the job. He was offered it in August apparently, and it took him this long to say yes. That's a bad sign. I'm sure he was like, keep giving me options for a budget, giving me a bonus and stock options. Okay, that's enough. So Joshua Grode, who's a Hollywood lawyer, has taken the gig. It's interesting not to have someone who has more creative experience, but he's going to be working with Mary Parent. We'll talk about her in just a moment. But he's a big Hollywood lawyer. He's worked with Legendary, A24, Lionsgate, Marvel, Miramax, Summit, etc., and advised banks as well, and the Academy of Motion Pictures Arts and Sciences. So he certainly has a lot of connections and experience. And he's going to be working as a partner with Mary Parent, who is the vice chairman of Worldwide Production, and she comes from Universal. She also used to work with Scott Stuber producing movies. Her background, I think, is okay. You know, when she and Stuber were making films, they made these like B comedies for the most part. She wouldn't instill a ton of confidence in me, but she's well liked in Hollywood, and she again has connections. So we'll see how they do. It'll be interesting to see if the Chinese money situation does work out. But Legendary is very interesting because you'll recall we've discussed them before and some of the problems they were having, and that they started out as a finance company and they decided to become a creative production company that actually made their own movies. Like they used to just finance other studio fare. But then the problem was that they started taking creative credit for films they were only financing, like Jurassic World. They were like, "You're welcome, audiences," trying to tell fans that they were responsible. And Universal was like, "Whoa, you only helped pay for Jurassic World. You had nothing to do with it creatively." One of the reasons that Legendary no longer works with Warner Brothers is partially because of that problem. And they're still with Universal. Universal is still distributing their films, but you might recall that for Crimson Peak, Universal was like, "Stop being annoying. You're making really bad business decisions and you're putting us on the hook for them." So Legendary is a fascinating company, and it's curious to see how they're going to continue. All right, so and also whenever we get a hot new executive, somebody who's going to help shape the course of movies going forward, it's always important to pay attention. So those are the three stories of the day, and I have a really interesting viewer question from Bubba Montiero. Bubba says, "Hi, good night, Grace. I'll try this. Here's my question." I like this. "Could you explain what is this theater averages? What does it really mean? Especially when you say, for example," because I talk about this in Movie Math all the time, my weekly box office report, The Shape of Water was open in only 2 theaters. Just 2 theaters. And I'd really like to know what this means. So thank you. I hope you picked my question. I hope this isn't too bad a question for the show. Just mention the answer anytime. Thanks. So great, Bubba. Great question. So I just wanted to explain this and why people pay attention to this number. So when you're looking at the box office report, it talks about how much money the movie earned for the weekend. And of course, you also have the total to date domestically. Just every time you look at a box office chart, it'll say how much the movie dropped if it's not its opening weekend from the last week. Then it will also say how many theaters it's playing in, and that you'll see if that's changing. How many theaters it's lost, if theaters are being added, and particularly in the specialty market, people pay close attention to this. Then you'll see a theater average. Now, this is an important number for every movie that's in the top 10, any movie actually that's in theaters, to analyze how it's doing. But people pay particularly attention to it for specialty market limited releases because the numbers tend to be very high. So what this means when we're talking about the per theater average, it's what each screen is pulling in. When you go to a multiplex, it's often a big blockbuster will be playing on several screens, 4 screens there. And with something like The Shape of Water, it opened in just 2 theaters in New York City last weekend. So it's only playing on 2 screens in the entire country. So the per theater average means basically how crowded each theater is, how crowded each showing is, right? So you're getting an idea if it's a large number, if it's playing to sold out crowds, right? It's a way to gauge demand. And you can look at this number even for the films that are in wide release, and you have something that's like, say, above 3,000 or 4,000, that's good. Like a big movie will have like 6 or something, right? 6,000, and that means the theaters are doing well. There's a good turnout. But you have something that has like a middling 1,000 per theater average, something in the $1,000 range, that means, it's a soft crowd, right? And so, also distributors will look at the per theater average to see if maybe they should be adding more theaters. They're like, wow, look how many people want to see the movie. Let's give them some more options to do so. But if the numbers are low in the per theater average, you don't need to add more screens because obviously what's out there is enough. And also, if the per theater average is particularly low, you can take some of your screens because, a lot of times studios and distributors have a relationship with the theaters for a certain number of screens. So let's say you're Warner Brothers, right? And so, Justice League or any movie is like a little soft, right? So you're like, oh, I want to push this other movie I have in theaters. So I'm going to take a couple of these screens and I'm going to say, please put my other movie on it. right? So because that movie has a little bit of a stronger per theater average, so I think that's a better use of my screens. So that's how that works out. So I hope that gives you some insight into that, Bubba. Thank you so much for your question. Thank you everybody for tuning in. Please write down below, I think, today's top 3 stories, Bubba's viewer question, anything you'd like to see covered tomorrow, and any questions, of course, that you might have. Thanks for watching. Bye.